Hello, BookTube. I am once again joined by my friend Zach from the Brattle. Say hi to my imaginary BookTube friends. And once again, we are here to address a fundamentally important topic, which is the pernicious effect of sabermetrics on the sport of Major League Baseball. No.
Well, also, at this point, Little League Baseball.
I know. I've heard when we do get to that subject.
Yeah.
It is, believe it or not, I mean, it's an ongoing joke here, but it is also fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. One of the only ways that you could possibly make anything connected with baseball interesting.
And I think we're done here.
Zach has never liked my characterization of Major League Baseball as recreational activity for portly elderly gentlemen. He's never liked that. So, we will not be talking about baseball. Instead, we're going to be talking about, contain your shock, books. We're going to be talking about books. You have a subject on your mind, right? Personal book collections.
I do. For those who don't know, Steve, in addition to being a heavy customer at the Brattle, he also sells books to us frequently, probably once a month anyway, right? Steve,
if not more,
like that.
Yeah, or yeah. I'd be buried in them if I didn't do that.
And that's been going on for years. And usually we'll show up to the cottage, and Steve will have a pile or many piles of books. Either for a while it was in the living room, and now it's usually in the kitchen. And they're anywhere from a couple hundred to several hundred sometimes books, a mix of newly published things and galleys, and stuff from Steve's backlog that he's just getting out of his collection. And I'm always interested how you make those decisions.
But I'm not the only
book
reviewer. I'm not the only book reviewer.
What's that?
You get other galleys from
we do occasionally, but it's been a while since we've had any other regular sellers. I'm sure you can think of at least one other who sold to us pretty regularly, and that's been a while.
Yeah.
Not since that was a before times thing, not since the pandemic anyway.
But you see, because this touches on a subject that people often ask me about in connection with you or other people at the Brattle, which is how you build your own collection.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you have all bookstores for their employees have a kind of set aside area where you can sort of put things on your own personal hold shelf.
Yes.
Barnes & Noble had that for a long time and then did away with it because some regional manager went back to those hold shelves and said, this is thousands of dollars of merchandise. I know perfectly well these employees are not paid well enough to ever buy this.
Yes.
So what's all this doing here?
Well, to give you an idea what the Brattle's like, each employee has a shelf in the office that's probably 2.5, 3 feet long, by a foot high shelf that is just our hold shelf, and we can put anything there, and it's just there until we want to buy it. And you can imagine what happens, how quickly, how many days or weeks, usually not months, it takes for an employee to fill that up.
Is the Brattle the only place you get books?
Oh, no. I certainly will buy from other dealers. I'll buy new books occasionally.
So you do, you buy new books?
Oh yeah.
Walk into a bookstore.
I buy books from lots of different places. Yeah.
Well,
no, I'm a heavy user myself.
What about my little pet subject, ebooks?
Occasionally. I'm usually reading, I usually have one, and I just use my phone, my iPhone. I don't have a special e-reader.
Okay.
So at any one time, I will have a book on my phone that I'm reading, usually fiction, although not always. And I'll have two or three physical books going too.
The idea has been haunting me lately of how much e-reading I do, and how little sense that makes of all the books that are on the shelves here.
Right. Well,
makes them make less and less sense.
It's affected what I keep
in my library,
at least a little. So I can imagine it is starting to have a big effect on you.
Yeah, yeah. It's happened a few times in the last few weeks alone, where I'm done when I'm winding up the day's writing and the day's emailing and the day's playing with Frida and whatnot, and it's starting to get towards midnight, which is dedicated reading time.
Mm-hmm.
What I do as I get closer and closer to that is amass during the course of the day what I'm going to be reading when I start reading.
Mm-hmm.
It's dedicated reading, all devices off, no contact with anyone. And several times in the last 2 weeks alone, something in the course of the day has prompted me to want to put an older title on the night's read. There's always forthcoming stuff that's on the night's reading, but there's always a mix too of rereads or older stuff. And 2 or 3 times in the last 2 weeks, I have come upon one of those choices and thought, well, the print book is right over there. And I don't go and get it. I get an ebook instead and bring that.
Interesting. Interesting. So, okay. So one question I have, well, one thing I'll say about one more thing, talking about the hold shelves at the Brattle, since you told what the Barnes and Noble. So we have, each person has a dedicated shelf. That is woefully insufficient, as you can imagine. Although I have to say, I'm pretty good about filtering things in and out. There are definitely books collecting dust, literally, on a number of the employees' hold shelves. But what also happens in a building like this, where there are simply books everywhere, each person, or I shouldn't say each person, but I know I have at least, well, I have one unofficial hold area where I have a stack of books that people know about. And I have a couple more that I don't think anyone knows about yet. So that also happens.
But you mentioned that you're pretty good at winnowing out keepers from whims. What is that process?
Well, it's
that doesn't apply to Brattle, right? That applies to all the books that you acquire from everywhere.
It certainly did. Well, I have a few different categories or tiers of books that I consider putting books into. If I'm going to take a book home, it's either because I'm going to read it in the next week, it's because I'm researching something that I need it for, or it's going into either the permanent or semi-permanent collection of books.
You have a semi-permanent collection.
I do. Well, most things. I'm a book collector.
Would there be an extra category for you? Wouldn't there also be a category of collectible items?
Well, that's that. All basically, most of what falls into the categories I mentioned are collectible items.
So you read them anyway?
No, no. I have sort of the books that I read at home, and I have the books that are collectible, that are there because they're an important edition of something that I collect. But I also, there's some overlap between those and books that I just always want to have a hard copy of to read, which I imagine is a lot of what you have behind you.
Oh, that's what this room is. That's only what this room is. There's no organization here except that these are the books I can't live without.
But I will say that I've at least halved that portion of the collection in the past year because I know how available they are. Either coming through the Brattle, just picking up a paperback copy or something, or as an ebook. So that's a very small portion of the collection. And
that's recent. So you're saying that number drastically decreased recently. So I'm not the only one who's experiencing this.
Not at all.
Book people.
No, it dovetailed. It corresponded nicely, or perhaps by necessity, with the arrival of my daughter a couple of years ago, and I needed to clean out space, but it really did. I have looked at it that way, that things that I would feel undefended if I didn't have a copy of, that I could just pick up from time to time. I feel vulnerable. Now the number of those titles is quite small.
Is your daughter amassing a library?
What's that?
Is your daughter amassing a library?
Well, she is. We're hesitant to bring in non-board books at the moment because she's no longer considering the book as a potential food source, which was which took her a while to wean her off of that. But she's still not necessarily treating it as a text. So so
A very
we're
bookish
still,
way to put it. She's
yeah.
not necessarily treating it as a text.
Oh, but she
Fair.
loves books.
Deep
We
inside
read
your soul, you are so Russian.
we read several books a day, and she has a few dozen anyway.
And one little detail that you forgot to mention when you mentioned the shop coming over to collect my latest Brattle pile is all the generations of dogs that you've all encountered over the from hordes of beagles with their tails up in the air. My fat basset hound who would low like a cow, just woo.
Well, the noise, from dogs that were essentially, I guess, mildly sentient obstacles to Frida, who is an adversary.
She is a very present. She insists on being very present. Whereas, I hate to say it, but a mildly sentient object very much describes my basset hound, Lucy.
Yeah.
That is very accurate.
Lucy was wonderful.
She was wonderful.
Lucy and I could party.
So when we're talking about this, I want to talk about that seismic shift.
Sure.
You know, these things are easily gettable. I already have them as ebooks, and they're also easily gettable if I don't. But how much of that is enhanced by you knowing the just fire hose of books that come through the Brattle? Does that change that? A lot of people hold on to books and accumulate them because to them, on some level, the books are rare, not collectible, but that they don't see many books. And that can't be present at all for you.
You might be surprised to know it took me, yes, and that's been available to me since the first day I worked here. It took me about 11 years for that actually to sink in.
But why? Why would it take
a minute.
that long?
That's how much a lot of these particular books were security blankets for me.
But 11 years? That's a long time.
It didn't even occur to me that I wouldn't have them anymore, that I wouldn't have a bed as an object in my home. So it was a slow process to realize, no, I don't need a copy of every one of, now I'm just going to be trolling you, every one of Kurt Vonnegut's novels in paperback.
I was going to mention One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. If you read it in high school and you have fond memories of that or whatnot, you would have that paperback. But if you work at the Brattle, you see 20 copies of that a month.
That's right.
And that must erode the sense of clinginess.
Well, it does, and it got me particularly with a copy of Cat's Cradle that was one of the mass market versions with a particular cover. That was the first one I read when I was 14, 15 years old. And when I saw not just the frequency with which we saw that title, but that particular cover, I thought, well, maybe I don't need to do this. But like I said, this could just be me. But it took me many, many years for that light bulb to go off.
That's a thing that customers coming into the Brattle often, sometimes I hear them get huffy about it. Because they assume that fire hose. So they walk in and say, I need a copy of Tom Jones. And it's entirely likely that you might not have one. And what kind of a shop are you running here?
It's true. And that just goes back to the number one rule of books, is that there are so many books. There are just so many books. The likelihood of finding any one is comparatively low, even at a place like the Brattle, which has more titles than most places still around.
So with your own books, do you reach a periodic spasm, a pinch point where you suddenly say, is it a regular process of taking things in, downgrading them in the tiers and then getting them out? Or is there, I have spasms because them in the previous month's books, new books from publishers, when that month is over, most of the books I don't need anymore. So
Right.
that's a natural process. But what about?
Yeah. I'd say it's a semi-regular. Well, like I said, there are some books that I have at home because I'm just working on a particular research project. And after I'm done with that, I might want to keep one of those books for future reference, but for the most part, I'll get rid of them. But I have gone through spasms in the time of saying, you know what, I'm not collecting this anymore. And there go 50 books.
There go 50 books. Exactly. Yeah. The minute I got an entire library of, for instance, Star Trek novels. They're a sweet tooth. They're a sentimental thing. I realize they have no actual literary value. And the minute I had 100 of those as ebooks,
there's no.
The printed books, those printed books just don't make the cut. The thing that I worry about or wonder about is whether or not that might just be true across the board, and I'm just being slow to realize it.
What it's very possible. But I don't think so. I don't think that'll happen with me. I think I'll always want some. Well, I'll always have my collectible book, my book collection books,
right,
in some form.
And
although that's always kind of changing too.
But what is that process like? I mean, sure. You're at the Brattle, you're in the basement, you're opening boxes, and there's the one tier of your instincts is what everybody listening will immediately know, which is, do I want this or not? Yes. But for you, there's also that extra thing of, do I want this as a collectible item or not?
Yeah. Well,
I assume that happens far less often.
It does, because I'm much more specific in what I'm collecting. There are only a few categories of things I'm collecting. For instance, I have a collection of, and this is going to sound very narrow, but it's actually not. I have a collection of facsimiles and reproductions of editions, early editions of the Columbus letter. The first printed piece of, quote, Americana, which was printed in a number of editions, one of Columbus's dispatches from the New World.
You say facsimiles of that?
Yeah, lots. There are a lot of them out there, of various kinds. Obviously, the originals are well beyond my ability to purchase, even if one were available, which it's not.
But would one become available? See, this touches on a subject that we touched on.
One could always come available.
Sell such a thing. Who would buy such a thing? Those belong in museums.
They do, and usually it is museums that would buy it. But private people spend $75 million for a painting too. That certainly should be in a museum, but there is a market for it among just individuals.
And so there's an actual ecosystem of facsimile editions, and
sure.
Some of the facsimile editions are more collectible than other facsimile editions.
Well, I don't know about this. Some of them are objectively better made.
Okay.
They have better supporting materials. They have a better essay. They have better.
So is that process forethought? Or does it ever happen that you will be looking at your books and you will suddenly realize, oh wait, I'm collecting this? I didn't realize
that's what happened with that. Really? I looked at it and I'm like, I have 7 of these. And I'm like, just because I really like them.
I wonder how often that's the way that it starts.
Yeah. With me, it's been a few different ways. Another thing, and now we're getting really in the weeds of book collecting and bibliography. But one thing I really like about bibliography is, let's see if I can make this reasonable if I can explain this in 90 seconds. But throughout sort of the history of printing, really into the 20th century, or at least through the 19th century, paper was the most expensive resource in making a book. And this goes really into the 19th century. So printers would do everything they could not to waste paper. This would turn up, you can see evidence of this in the contents of early printed books and 19th century books in lots of ways, but one of the ways is with what we call cancels, where an individual leaf of the printed sheet would be cut out and either removed because it had an error in it, and a new leaf would be pasted in so that it, fits seamlessly where it should in the book. Or that leaf would be put somewhere else in the book just because they had room on that printed sheet to print that page, and they didn't want to waste an entire sheet to print that one portion. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so what I collect,
And suddenly I realized people could collect those things.
well, so what I collect,
Oh,
and these don't turn up a ton, but they're out there, are examples of a book that have a cancel, but have it in its original position in the printed sheet where it shouldn't be in the finished book. In other words, it should have been cut out and put somewhere else. But it also has the cancel where it should be in the book. So you'll be flipping through the book, you'll be reading it, and then there's a page or 2 pages, a leaf that certainly are part of the book, but shouldn't be in that part of the book. And then you see it again where it should be.
And you collect.
I have
in the weeds.
I have a half dozen or so of those from the from the 16th to the 19th century that I like. Which the only way one would find this is if I have a book that I'm cataloging and I'm collating, and I see, oh, there's a cancel there. It turns up, oh, there it is again. So, to find those half dozen or so, that's probably gone through 10,000 books.
But that doesn't happen anymore, right? Cancels don't happen anymore.
Probably not, although it's plausible. There are certainly, a good example that comes up every once in a while is Nabokov and his son translated Lolita into Russian. So there's a collectible Russian edition, Russian language edition of Lolita, and that book has like 8 or 9 canceled leaves in it.
Why? Why so many?
Because of errors, and it's just, again, it's cheaper, more efficient to cut out the single leaf rather than reprinting an entire sheet.
So Nabokov was not only a crappy writer, he was a crappy printer?
So Steve, you have lots of books behind you. So anyway,
Zach and I agree on nothing.
I've probably bored everyone to death with that last explanation, but other than seeking out particular authors or particular books that are really important to me to collect, that's how everything else permanent in my collection has come about, almost sort of accidentally. Like,
so you don't experience the possible other reaction to being in front of the book fire hose at the Brattle, which is to lose interest completely. I could see that happening in some psychologies where a person loses interest completely. I've known some Brattle employees who went in loving books and came out hating them.
And that makes sense. That makes sense to me. No, it's only made me more interested, but I'd have to say interested in. No, I'm not even going to qualify it. No, it's just made me more interested. It makes me want to understand. What's that?
The Brattle gets a huge amount of books, and a huge proportion of those books are not interesting. They just aren't. Someone might try them out in the sale lot, but they just aren't interesting. There's nothing distinctive or, well, I don't care about collectible, but
setting that aside.
Yeah,
there's no reason, or one, I would imagine, as I'm pricing it, there's no reason someone would pick this up and want to read it, let alone pay a US dollar for it.
Right.
And I don't. But I'm wrong a lot of the time too. I'm also right for a fair amount of time.
Most people don't have access to the kind of volume that the shop has.
And that's something I have to.
When you look at things, it really can.
And that's something I have to continually remind myself of as I'm pricing. Like, yes, I've seen 175 of these in the past year, but the person who's going to want it hasn't, and I have to try and keep that in mind too.
Right. how many times do you hear that from people, from customers at the shop, that they've never, they don't have access to a store like this where they are.
And by the way, if you come into the shop and that's true of you, tell us. I love hearing it. It's it puts a little it gives me a little energy sometimes.
I do my best. I bring as many people to the shop as introduce as many people as possible to the shop.
You certainly do.
And then I conduct my standard trick, because your first book purchase at the Brattle is on me, whether you want it to be or not. And so many people fall for the old, oh, what'd you find?
Yep.
Just don't give it back.
It's a great move. They never see it coming.
But books are under control where you live at your home?
Yes.
They're under control. So they're
and
not.
Again, having a wife and a small daughter help that, but I think they've always been sort of in control with me, because I've seen what it looks like to not be in control.
You regularly see that.
Regularly. And I don't ever want to be within, a barge pole's distance of that.
I can imagine. I've heard horror stories over the years from people
And
at Brattle.
It can be, walking into
little canyons to walk around and just sloping.
Walking into a true, we sort of joke about hoarding books, but to see it, or hoarding anything, because usually with someone it's not one thing,
right?
To see it, to really see it, it's not a joking matter.
No.
It's
people always say that, people who have a lot of books on the shelves, like the ones behind me, will joke and say, I'm a hoarder. And oh my God, nothing prepares you for walking into the house of a real hoarder. And you're right, it's everything. It's not just one thing. The hoarders lose their ability to discard.
Yes.
Period. Not discard X, Y, or Z, but just discard. They lose that ability, or never had it. And it's an amazing, I can just imagine it with books. I've seen it with other things.
With books, and there's sort of a spectrum to it, of neatness almost. I've been in a true book hoarding situation that was probably 20,000 books in a 4 or 5 room apartment. Where literally, you said a moment ago, canyons. There was essentially my shoulder width. They're little pathways through every room, and in one room there was a little bit for a bed, but not much, and to the bathroom, but they were in the bathroom too, and in the kitchen.
But in a circumstance like that, I mean, as a buy, those people wouldn't sell their books, but those books wouldn't be usable, right?
No. Well, in the one I'm talking about, they were in almost to a book in impeccable condition.
Really?
Yeah. Even on the bottom, even the one touching the carpet or the hardwood floor. Now, I've also been in situations where the first 6 or 7 books up from the floor were utter trash, decaying.
That's what I would think.
Yeah.
But the people are going to get rid of them anyway, right? Is there a circumstance where someone is a hoarder, but they nevertheless call because they've set aside a certain number of things they actually do want to get rid of?
I've never seen that. I've only seen true hoarder situations that were estates, that were someone had.
Right.
Had
so no, they're not there anymore, or they would just keep it up. Yep. I can only imagine. Good Lord. You want to, you really, when you encounter something like that, when you walk into a place, a home like that, a home of an actual hoarder, it's that skin creepy feeling of, okay, this is a serious psychological problem that I am now in the midst of. I am now in direct contact with a serious psychological problem, because it's, it's manifest. You can see it.
Yeah. Oh, there's no avoiding it.
Zoom tells me that we're running out of time, and I don't want, last time we ended in literally mid-word.
I feel like we should do that every time.
So we can finish up with a question for everybody else. We're talking about how you amass books, how you determine what you're keeping, what you're semi-keeping, what you're getting rid of. What's your advice? I mean, you must have advice for people who are considering selling books. I mean, is it as simple as the advice that you gave last time? Do you actually want to get rid of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly part of it, but I'd be even more general, is have a reason for whatever, or have a reason for whatever you're doing. If you're keeping it, make sure you have a real reason for doing it. If you're selling it, make sure you have a real reason for doing that.
But you changed that. You started out with have a reason, and then it became have a real reason. So there are wrong.
Right. Well, that's between, between each person. But I think,
is there a bad reason? A reason that's all across the board bad? Is, for instance, I need the space always a bad reason?
No, that can be a really. I think that's a really good reason.
Okay.
But I think if the reason I give that advice is because usually if somebody thinks about it a little, rather than just going on the sort of immediate emotional attachment one or detachment,
right?
If you sit back and think about it, usually you're going to make a decision you can live with.
You get books, I think that's, don't you? You get books that a person can't bear to get rid of, and you get books. I mean, the Brattle deals in death. Quite often, the Brattle deals in death, where you deal with people who,
in many cases,
pretty obviously didn't like the owner of the books and wants them gone for a whole bunch of reasons that don't have a lot to do with space. What a minefield that must be to walk through with any kind of discretion.
It can be, and discretion is the key word. And there can be outright hostility that can be masked pretty well sometimes, but
do you get warring family members?
Sometimes, although that's one that once we sort of sniff it out is one to extract ourselves.
Right, to get rid of. I can just imagine the scenario where somebody sells, granddad's room full of books before the other grandkid can come in from the West Coast. They get there and are outraged that the books are gone. And it seems to me it would be natural for them to take some of that out on you.
Yes. Oh, of course. Of course. So yeah, there's sort of an informal checklist of things we go through, especially when dealing with an estate. Are there other family members involved? Can you make the final decision? That kind of stuff.
But is the decision final?
Yeah, almost.
The shop is still a business, right?
Oh yeah. It is, although yes, it is final. But we're also not heartless. We understand that this can be a really fraught decision-making process for people. And sometimes people, really do make mistakes and, didn't contact everyone they should have when they thought they did. So there have been times where we've literally gone through box after box after box looking for things that someone really didn't.
Looking for particular books.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. Oh wow.
It doesn't. Again, we go to great lengths to avoid that ever happening. But it has happened.
where one family member says, "No, I don't care about the rest of them, but these were important to me."
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And what about you're dealing with raw emotions. Do people sometimes, accuse the Brattle of being like a vulture, just swoop?
Yeah, that's happened. But I think it happens as little as it possibly could, because we try to avoid those situations.
Yeah, it must be nice.
And we also try to be. Yes, we're always trying to buy something and sell it for more. That is the nature of every business. But one of the reasons I think we do it well and have a good reputation is we try to be pretty transparent about how we do that and what we expect.
Transparent is one word. Yes, the Brattle's the only shop I've ever sold books to that on a semi-regular basis will correct the amount they gave me upwards. I'll sell, 300 books, and I'll here's a check or store credit or whatever. I'll go in a week later, and it'll be you or Eric or somebody will say, we were looking over those books and we really didn't do this by way. We need to do another check.
And especially because we buy from you so regularly, and it's usually about the same amount, and it's usually about the same quality of stuff and mix of stuff, which is to say good quality, but then there's galleys in there and so and so. So we sort of get in a rhythm. Usually it's about this much, and every once in a while there's something that, oh, that's actually, different than what's usually in there. Whereas
such a great moment one time when the wife of the shop's owner saw me browsing in one of the aisles in the shop, and it was suddenly reminded, oh wait, we owe you one of those corrective checks, and just walked up to me and handed me a check. And I couldn't resist, because those of you, the wife of the shop's owner has an outsized personality. I love
Fred lightly,
very
Steve.
dangerous to tease her, but I love teasing her. So when she did that, I said thank you, and then I turned to all the other people in the aisle and said, oh, you haven't had your checks yet? Not happy about that at all.
that is now that is an all-time Steve line. That was good.
Yes, I got a million of them. One time I was in an aisle with a friend of mine, and we pulled down Ferdy Duke from the shelf. Totally obscure, unreadable book, and thought nothing of it, joked about it a bit, and then weeks later, I was in the shop without that friend. I was just standing there in the fiction section browsing when a customer walked behind me and whispered, Ferdy Duke. Because he'd heard me the first time and remembered. It's so weird. I loved it, but it was all right. So we're going to wrap up before we get cut off in mid-word. And next time we'll deal with baseball. We just might. All right. Well, I get to say goodbye this time. Thank you.
Very good.
We'll
Good to talk to you, Steve.